jacket to a drowning stranger. "Ma'am, don't go home with her. Find somewhere safe." The siren still pulsed inside my chest as I stared through the windshield at Amanda's reflection in the patrol car glass, cool, beautiful, unbothered, while a second version of her stared up at me from the paper. Another name printed beneath the same green eyes. Rebecca Torres. Wanted, fraud, identity theft, conspiracy. At 67. I had thought I knew what danger looked like. It turns out it can wear pearls, drive too fast, and call you mom. It had been an ordinary Tuesday afternoon in Cedar Falls, the kind of sun-soft day when errands float by like leaves in slow water. Amanda had offered to drive me to my eye doctor, an unusual kindness that threw off a faint, metallic glint, like the taste of a coin on the tongue. "How are you feeling about the new glasses prescription?" She asked as we merged onto Highway 58, her voice sweet enough to stick to your ribs. I told her I only needed time to adjust. I watched her profile platinum hair tucked neat behind one ear, every gesture efficient, every glance cataloging. 36, she'd told us, with the kind of beauty that makes clerks fold rules and waiters bring extra lemon. "You know," she said, "the honey thickening. Maybe it's time we talked about your living situation. That big house is getting to be too much for you." There it was, the key she'd been slowly turning for months. My home of 38 years, where we'd brought Brian home from the hospital, where Frank's laughter still lived in the woodwork, where I'd held him through his last breath 18 months ago. "I managed just fine," I said, heat pricking my throat. Her hands tightened on the wheel. "What if you fall? Brian worries constantly." I looked at her. "Does he?" "Because when I see Brian, he mostly worries about working enough overtime to pay for that new truck you wanted." The speedometer crept higher. Amanda always drove faster when she was angry. "That truck is practical," she said. "Brian needs reliable transportation." I thought of the payments on $60,000 of polished steel, of a kitchen renovation that cost more than my last year of teaching, of a Disney cruise while Brian clocked 70-hour weeks. "Of course, dear," I murmured, which is sometimes the safest way to say no. The siren bloomed behind us blue, then red, then that sharp whine that makes your stomach contract. We were doing 75 in a 65 when the state trooper's lights told us what we already knew. Amanda pulled over with theatrical reluctance. He was young and careful, the kind of careful that keeps people alive. "Ma'am, were you aware you were going 75? Amanda leaned into the performance. "I'm so sorry, officer. I was just trying to get my mother-in-law to her appointment on time. Her vision's been troubling her. Two birds with one sentence, speeding and gently discrediting me." He looked at her license, then at me, and something in his expression changed position, like a puzzle piece clicking. "Step out of the vehicle, please." Charm faltered. She went. He led her to the cruiser, spoke into his radio, nodded once, and then came to me. "Ma'am, I need you to come with me," he said, low and even. I started to ask why, and he pressed the folded paper into my hand. "Don't go home with her. Find somewhere safe." The paper felt warm from his pocket. I opened it. The face was Amanda's, but the eyes were colder. The name underneath not Amanda at all. "There must be some mistake," I said, though my voice sounded like it belonged to the woman in the photo. "No mistake. Multiple identities. Over a decade." He glanced back toward his cruiser where Amanda sat in handcuffs, no longer the woman who worried about my prescription, but a stranger with my son's ring on her finger. "Has she had access to your finances?" he asked. My mouth went dry. "She helped me organize paperwork last month," I admitted, hearing how naive it sounded in the open air. "He told me to call someone I trusted, not to go home until the arrest was processed, to check my credit report first thing in the morning. I dialed Helen. My neighbor's voice snapped awake. She arrived 30 minutes later, gray hair escaping its pins, eyes bright with concern. We sat in the trooper's shadow, and I let the facts rearrange my life. "Dear Lord," Helen whispered when she saw the photo. I never trusted that girl too polished. We moved to her kitchen, strong tea and stronger silence between us. And I tried to trace the moment the ground had shifted. Love at first sight in a hardware store. Amanda had said, maybe it had been reconnaissance at first sight. Maybe the story of us had always been written by someone else's hand, and if the first chapter ended on the side of Highway 58, the second was about to begin with a new and terrible question. How do you tell your son that his wife is a lie with perfect lipstick? Brian came over the next morning, shoulders tight, jaw set, the same posture he'd had at 8 years old when he'd broken a neighbor's window and tried to convince me the ball had flown there on its own. We sat at my kitchen table, the table that had held birthday cakes and casseroles and hospice paperwork, and I slid the printouts between us like a deck of bad cards. The police showed me this photograph. "Brian," I said, steady as I could manage. "Rebecca Torres, born March 15th, 1995, 29, not 36. He barely glanced before shaking his head. "People look alike." "Mom, you said yourself your vision's been blurry." I told him about the officer's warning, about multiple identities, about the handcuffs glinting beneath the patrol car's fluorescent interior. "This is insane," he insisted, the words brittle. "Amanda would never hurt anyone. She takes care of me." I held his gaze and asked, "With what money?" That hit something he didn't want hit. "We have expenses, the house, the truck, her medical bills." The new phrase curled like smoke. "Medical bills." "What bills?" I asked, and he looked away. "She's seeing specialists in Chicago." "Hormonal issue. Insurance won't cover experimental procedures." "What are the doctors' names?" I said gently. "Have you seen a bill? A claim? Anything?" He scrubbed his hands over his face. "She handles all that. I'm working too much for paperwork. I saw the boy who had once wanted so badly to be believed." "Or she's making sure you never see it," I said, and his chair scraped the linoleum as he stood. "I'm not listening to this. You've never liked her." "I've been uneasy since the beginning," I admitted. "That's not the same as dislike." He stared out the window at the yard where he'd learned to throw a baseball, and when he spoke, his voice came from a place I would later recognize as fear masquerading as anger. "You're lonely, Mom. You can't stand that I have someone." I didn't remind him that I'd loved his father for 44 years and had managed to survive loving more than one person at once. "I love you both," I said instead, but he was already leaving, saying, "She posted bail this morning. She needs me." And then the door closed at 10 a.m., like a small thunderclap. Weeks went thin and brittle after that. Amanda's car still parked in their driveway. Their porch light still clicked on at 7 p.m., as if normalcy were a switch one could throw against truth. The charges were dismissed, mistaken identity. Her lawyer said paper stacked on paper until the pile looked like legitimacy. Helen tried to wrap the whole mess in hope. "Maybe it really was a mix-up," she said. But the memory of that cold flicker in Amanda's eyes when the trooper approached kept replaying behind mine. So I did what a retired school teacher does when the problem will not solve itself. I went to the library. On a public computer at 2 p.m., I looked up Amanda Miller and found 3 years of beautiful photographs, brunch plates, sunlit porches, lake water beating on tanned shoulders, perfectly curated and beginning exactly when she'd appeared in Cedar Falls. No awkward high school pictures, no college roommates, no aunties chiming in on birthdays. Most people's lives leave a longer trail. I told Helen that night, and she sipped her tea and said, "Maybe she's private," but her eyebrows knit in the middle. Little things began to show their seams. Amanda said she was from Rockford, but when we had suggested a weekend visit last spring, she'd changed the subject like a magician palming a coin. When she collected their mail one morning, I saw an envelope addressed to Rebecca Chen slip into her purse. That afternoon, against every rule I had ever taught about respecting boundaries and property, I waited until Brian left for his shift and Amanda drove off for her weekly shopping. I put on gloves like a character I would have judged 6 months earlier and went through their trash. Truth sometimes smells like coffee grounds and onion skins. Under those, a credit card statement with purchases in Chicago under the name Rebecca Chen Restaurants, a hotel, designer clothing on the same dates Amanda claimed to be lying on a clinic table under buzzed fluorescent lights. Beneath that, a deposit slip, $12,000 from something called Midwest Investment Services, with consultation fee in the notation line. I sat right there on the back steps with the wind needling my sweater and understood I was holding the first clear map to a larger crime. Midwest Investment Services. I learned back at the library at 4:30 p.m., specialized in liquidating assets quickly, exactly the service you'd hire if you needed someone's life converted into cash without leaving fingerprints. That night, I called the trooper who had put the first crack in the facade. "Officer," I said, breath steady because I made it steady. "I think she's positioning to strip Brian of everything." He listened, then said what the law sometimes says to the truth without Brian's complaint. "There isn't much to do. Document everything," he urged, "and be careful." When I hung up, the house felt suddenly too quiet, and I could hear my heart keep time with the refrigerator's soft hum. Then the flowers arrived, 24 white roses in a heavy glass vase, a card that read, "Thinking of you during this difficult time." "Amanda," Helen said. Maybe she's making peace, but the embossed cardstock felt like a glove slapped across the face, pretty and meant to sting. An hour later, Brian called to say we needed space, that Amanda was having panic attacks from the trauma of her arrest. I hung up and realized what she was doing. Step by measured step, isolate, confuse, fatigue, control. She was building a room around my son, and the walls were almost finished. The next door I knocked on was Tom Rodriguez's at the hardware store, under the dull glow of 8 p.m. Passam parking lot lights. He told me Brian had been distracted, making mistakes, even turning down help to improve insurance coverage. "People drowning grab any rope," Tom said, flicking ash. He wouldn't refuse unless someone told him not to. I thanked him, and as I drove home through streets that knew me by name, I understood that Amanda's bouquet wasn't contrition. It was a taunt. "Look how close I can stand to your grief and still smile." The break came from the kind of coincidence you'd never dare to script. I was at my weekly hair appointment, letting Cheryl fuss over the thinning silver that used to make Frank call me his moonlight girl. When she mentioned her cousin Jenny worked at the Illinois DMV, I'd said, almost absently, "My daughter-in-law's from Rockford." Cheryl froze with the comb halfway through my hair. "Miller from Rockford," she said, eyes widening in the mirror. "That's funny, Jenny was just telling me about some weird license transfer case with that name." My pulse quickened. What kind of weird? Cheryl leaned closer, lowering her voice. "Jenny said someone applied for a driver's license as Amanda Miller, but the paperwork didn't match up like the history had been built overnight. All the records were fresh, like someone hit reset on an entire life." I went home at 3 p.m., shaking, called Jenny that evening, and listened as she hesitated before breaking rules for what she called the sake of human decency. She told me Amanda Miller's identity was built using the Social Security number of a deceased infant from 1987. "That's how they do it," Jenny said, her voice flat with disgust. "Find a baby who died young, steal their identity, grow it into a full adult life. The problem is you can fake documents, but not memories. Nothing before 2021 in this woman's file is real." When I hung up, the house seemed to tilt. Amanda Miller didn't just steal, she didn't even exist. The next morning, I parked at the library again with a thermos of coffee and a mission. 6 hours later, my screen was filled with case studies of professional con artists' networks that operated like small corporations. They shared templates for fake IDs, trained each other in accents and regional slang, and tracked victims like inventory. They had accomplices, safe houses, and backup identities layered like skin. The lesson that blinked through every page was brutal. The people who fought early sometimes survived. The ones who waited lost everything. I drove home with that truth wedged behind my ribs like a splinter. Then, at 9 p.m., my phone rang. Mrs. Sullivan. The voice was Southern, elderly, careful. "My name's Margaret Hayes. I got your number from an officer in Iowa who said you might know someone called Amanda Miller." My heart slowed to a crawl. "She's married to my son." I said, "Honey, I'm so sorry. She destroyed my nephew's life 2 years ago." The sound that came out of me wasn't quite a word. Margaret told me her nephew had lost over $100,000 to the same woman, though she'd called herself Sarah Peterson then. She'd met him in a grocery store, moved in within weeks, claimed rare medical treatments, drained his accounts, vanished. She made him feel guilty for doubting her, Margaret said softly. By the end, he was apologizing for asking where the money went. We spoke for an hour, our stories overlapping like maps drawn by strangers describing the same country. Before we hung up, Margaret said, "If the police need my testimony, I'll talk. Been waiting 2 years to tell somebody what she did." I thanked her, and when the line went dead, I sat in the quiet with tears I hadn't felt coming. Amanda's biggest mistake wasn't underestimating me. It was assuming her past would stay scattered and silent. By the end of the week, I'd found 4 more victims across 3 states. Their stories formed a chorus, different towns, same rhythm. The woman had gone by many names: Sarah Peterson, Jennifer Walsh, Lisa Chen. Each man described the same pattern of charm, control, and slow financial bleeding until the day she disappeared. When Detective Sarah Morrison from Illinois called, she confirmed what we'd all suspected: Amanda wasn't working alone. "It's a criminal network," she explained. "They share targets, methods, even practice cover stories together. Think of it as a fraud franchise." My fingers tightened around the phone. How many victims? At least 12 confirmed, maybe more. Total losses near $2 million. Amanda had picked Cedar Falls like a botanist chooses soil, small town. Polite, trusting. I asked what their endgame was, and the detective sighed. Sometimes just cash. Lately, it's more advanced mortgaging homes, stealing identities, running shell companies. The word mortgaging hit like a jolt. Brian had been talking about refinancing their house to pay for her treatments. I told the detective, and she went silent for a beat. "Document everything," she said. "If she's following her pattern, you've got 2 to 3 weeks before she vanishes." That night, I sat staring at Frank's photograph on the mantel. His steady eyes looked back like they always had when I'd confessed a difficult truth. "She's going to ruin him," I whispered. But I also knew something Amanda didn't. 30 years of teaching had trained me to keep my voice calm while catching a lie mid-sentence. I might not be young or strong, but I'd spent a lifetime outsmarting clever children. Now it was time to outsmart a grown one. The following evening, I waited until 8 p.m. when Brian's truck pulled out for his double shift and Amanda left for book club. I unlocked their door with the spare key Brian had given me before his wedding, the one Amanda had always suggested he should take back. The house smelled like her perfume, something expensive and faintly chemical, like flowers pretending to be clean. In their bedroom closet, behind winter coats, I found a small filing cabinet I'd never seen before. The top drawer held driver's licenses, each with her photo and a new name. Beneath them, credit cards for those same aliases. The next drawer held property documents she'd already transferred partial ownership of their house to a company called Midwest Holdings, LLC. But what stopped my breath was the final drawer, a notebook, neat and chronological, outlining her relationship with Brian as if it were a business plan. She had tracked everything the day they met, the date she gained access to his accounts, the progress milestones. At the bottom, one sentence in red ink, extended timeline, additional asset discovered. Attached to it was a clipping of Frank's obituary. The phrase survived by his devoted wife Dorothy was underlined twice. It wasn't just Brian she'd targeted. I was the endgame. I called Detective Morrison the next morning with trembling hands. "She knows about my husband's life insurance," I said, my voice a whisper. "She's planning to steal from me, too." The detective's tone sharpened instantly. "Mrs. Sullivan, are you somewhere safe right now? I'm at home." "Why?" "Because if Amanda realizes you've discovered her plans, you could be in danger. These people don't just run when cornered, they push back." Her words hung in the air like static. And then, as if the universe had been waiting for its cue, my doorbell rang. Through the peephole stood Amanda, smiling, holding a casserole dish in both hands like a peace offering. "Dorothy, I know you're in there," she called sweetly. "I brought you that tuna casserole you love." My stomach dropped. I had never once said I liked tuna casserole. Detective Morrison's voice pressed through the phone. "Don't open the door. Pretend you're not home." But Amanda had already seen my shadow move. "Please," she coaxed. "I just want to talk." Against every instinct screaming no. I cracked the door open, chain still latched. "Hi, Amanda, this is a surprise." Her smile widened, eyes scanning behind me. "Can I come in? Just for a minute? It's not a good time. Please, Dorothy. Brian's so worried about you." She had used the one word guaranteed to pierce me. I hesitated, and she saw it. "He thinks you're upset. Let's clear the air." I should have closed the door. Instead, I unlatched the chain. Amanda glided past me into the kitchen as though she owned the house, set the casserole on the counter, and opened my refrigerator without asking. "You have such a lovely home," she said, the words smooth, but her eyes busy, cataloging every object, every potential asset. Frank had excellent taste. I kept my back straight. "What did you want to talk about?" She smiled and sat at my table, the same table where I'd first told Brian about her arrest. "I think there's been a misunderstanding about what happened," she began. "The police gave you the wrong impression. My lawyer proved it was a mistaken identity." Her voice was soft, her gaze steady. "But I'm worried you still have doubts about me. Brian said you've been asking questions about my treatments, my background, even my spending." She leaned closer, tone dipping to something sympathetic. "Curiosity can look like suspicion. That's not healthy for a family." I felt the weight of the trap she was setting make me the problem, the jealous mother, the paranoid widow. "I'm just trying to understand," I said, forcing my voice to stay even. "Of course you are." She smiled wider, like a shark mistaking itself for a saint. "I admire that about you, but we should focus on harmony. Brian loves us both. He's caught in the middle." She reached out, her hand covering mine, skin cold. "Let's end this tension." I nodded slowly. "You're right. Family harmony is important." Her eyes brightened, triumphant. "I knew you'd see reason." Then I asked, as gently as if I were in my classroom again, "If your name is Amanda Miller, why did I find credit cards and driver's licenses in your closet for Sarah Peterson, Jennifer Walsh, and Lisa Chen?" The transformation was instant. The smile died. The air changed temperature. "You broke into my house," she said quietly. "I used the key Brian gave me years ago. You had no right." Her tone was flat now, measured. Those documents belong to me. Explain them, I said. She rose slowly, stepping between me and the door. You're not going to drop this, are you? No, I said. I don't think I am. Amanda laughed softly, but the sound was wrong. No humor, only control. You know what your problem is, Dorothy. You're too smart for your own good. She turned toward the window, her silhouette sharp against the daylight. You've been very busy calling people, asking questions, playing detective. I've been protecting my son. You've been ruining a perfectly good operation. I froze. Operation. She turned back, and for the first time, I saw the real woman behind every false name. How long have you known? She asked. Since that trooper handed me your photo, Rebecca Torres. Amanda smirked. That was bad timing. I was planning to retire that identity anyway. Brian complicated things. He loves you. He's useful, she corrected. Nice guy. Steady income, inherited house, easy money. Then I realized he had a widowed mother with a big insurance policy. Why settle for $40,000 when I could get $400? Her casual cruelty made my stomach twist. You're a monster, I whispered. No, she said. I'm a survivor. She moved closer, voice low. Now, here's what's going to happen. We're going to visit your bank. You'll withdraw everything in your savings. Then we'll sign your house over to Midwest Holdings, LLC. And after that, she smiled faintly. You'll have a very unfortunate heart attack. Natural causes. My pulse roared in my ears. Brian would never believe that. He'll believe what I tell him. People do, when they love you. She lifted her phone and showed me a thread of messages from someone named Marcus. My business partner handles accidents. All I have to do is send him Brian's schedule. I kept my voice steady. You'd hurt him if necessary. He's replaceable. You, however, are not. But as she talked, something inside me shifted. I'd spent 2 years fearing this woman, but fear has an expiration date. I walked slowly to the counter where my medication tray sat. You know, I said quietly, you're right about one thing. She tilted her head. And what's that? I am too smart for my own good. Good, she said, taking a step closer. Then you understand your situation. Perfectly, I said. I lifted the little pill organizer, shaking the tablets gently in my palm. You see, I never actually take my blood pressure medication. My doctor gave me something stronger for anxiety. She frowned. What are you talking about, lorazepam? Fast acting. Especially when dissolved in food. Her eyes flicked toward the casserole on the counter. You drugged the tea, she said. No, I answered. I drugged the casserole. The one you brought for me. She blinked. You're bluffing. Am I? How are you feeling? Her pupils dilated. A little dizzy, I asked softly. Having trouble focusing. She stumbled, caught herself on the chair. You drugged me. I protected myself. I said, there's a difference. Amanda's composure cracked like glass under pressure. Her breath quickened. Her voice slurred at the edges. You think this will save you, she hissed, gripping the table. Marcus knows where I am. When I don't check in, he'll come looking. I lifted her phone from the counter. She hadn't even noticed me slide it away during her little speech. Will he? I said, glancing at the screen. Because, according to your messages, Marcus thinks you're at book club until tomorrow morning. He's not expecting to hear from you at all tonight. Her face drained of color. You went through my phone. Of course, I said softly. You left it right here, while you were threatening my son's life. She lunged for me, clumsy now, her coordination unraveling by the second. The casserole dish wobbled off the counter and shattered, the smell of tuna and betrayal filling the room. You don't know what you're doing, she said, voice cracking. My people will find you. You really should have stayed away from teachers, I said. We have excellent memories and endless patience. I tapped my own phone where a small red light blinked on the screen. You're being recorded, dear. The real detective Sarah Morrison is listening. Amanda froze, blinking as if she couldn't quite process the words. That's impossible, she rasped. Sarah Morrison doesn't exist. She does. I said, calm as still water. When the man on your burner phone answered as Detective Morrison, I got suspicious. I looked up the Illinois State Police directory and called the real number. Her legs buckled slightly. She's been waiting 18 months for evidence on your network. You just gave her a full confession. Her voice was barely more than a growl. You don't understand what you've done. There are others. There were. I corrected. Right now, there's a multi-state raid happening. You might want to sit down for that. I hadn't been sure when the police would arrive, but as if on cue, blue and red lights flooded through the kitchen window, washing Amanda's pale face in color. Outside, the sound of tires crunching gravel and voices shouting filled the night. She sagged into a chair, eyes unfocused, the predator suddenly small and human. This isn't over, she mumbled. Oh, I think it is, I said quietly. But don't worry about Brian. I'll make sure he understands this was never his fault. When the door burst open, the officers' voices filled the house, sharp and commanding. Amanda didn't resist. They cuffed her gently, almost kindly, leading her past me without a word. The faint chemical smell of her perfume lingered in the air long after the door closed behind her. I sat down, my hands trembling for the first time all night, and let the silence come back in pieces. 6 months later, I was sitting in a courtroom watching Amanda Miller, Rebecca Torres, Sarah Peterson, Lisa Chen, whatever name she truly owned, receive 15 years in federal prison. Brian sat beside me, eyes fixed on the floor. When the judge's gavel fell, he whispered, "Mom, I'm sorry, I didn't believe you." I squeezed his hand. You loved her. Brian, that's nothing to apologize for. But I treated you like you were crazy, he said. You tried to warn me. You were under her spell. I told him. Amanda was good at what she did. That doesn't make you weak. It makes you human. Detective Morrison approached us afterward, smiling faintly. Mrs. Sullivan, your evidence broke this case open. We've identified 47 victims across 8 years, total losses over $4 million. Without your recording, it might have taken us years to connect the dots. What about the others, I asked. We're recovering assets where we can, she said, and Marcus Chen, the man you heard about, was the ringleader. He's looking at 25 to life. Brian shook his head slowly. I can't believe I was married to someone like that. You weren't, I said gently. You were married to an illusion she built just for you. The real woman. None of us ever met. Outside the courthouse. Sunlight cut across the stone steps. Sharp and clean. What happens now? Brian asked as we walked toward his truck. Now, I said. You rebuild. You've got your house back, your savings mostly recovered, and a second chance at peace. He looked at me. Are you sure you'll be okay living alone? I smiled. Brian, I've been taking care of myself for 67 years. I think I can manage a few more. He hesitated, eyes damp. I love you. Mom, I'm proud of you. I love you too. Honey, I said, and I'm proud of you for facing the truth. That evening, I stood in my kitchen, the same one where Amanda had once threatened my life, and watched the light fade across the backyard. The quiet didn't feel dangerous anymore. It felt earned. My phone buzzed. A message from Helen Coffey tomorrow morning. I want to hear every detail of how you took down a criminal mastermind. I smiled and typed back, only if you promise to let me tell it without interrupting. Deal, she replied. I'll bring the good coffee. Heroes deserve premium blend. I set the phone down and looked around the house Frank and I had built. the one Amanda had nearly stolen. For the first time in 2 years, it finally felt like home again. Sometimes the villains we fear most aren't strangers lurking in the dark, but the ones who smile across our dinner tables. And sometimes, when life tries to teach you fear, the lesson waiting beneath it is courage. I learned that truth on Highway 58, holding a folded piece of paper that shattered everything I thought I knew. And in the end, it made me stronger than I ever believed I could be. If you found this story gripping, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more true tales that remind us how strength can come from the most unexpected places. And if you've ever faced something you thought you couldn't survive, tell me in the comments. I'd love to hear your story.